I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual now. 起立，面向佛堂，参加先鞠躬、一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位的传习鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。
Thanks a bunch. And once again, thanks for having me. Thank you to everybody who's shown up to engage in this process and hopefully learn to understand and better utilize the Tao teachings and practices. It is a beautiful, very warm, sunny day in scenic Indianapolis, Indiana. Hope it is where you guys are too. Although I think in some of the places where we're connecting from these days, it's actually the middle of the night. As I say fairly frequently, it never ceases to amaze me how many places and how many people and how much of the world we've actually reached out and connected to over the years that we've been doing this. And I think that's just the neatest thing in the world. Today we're going to chat just a bit about sentience, the essence and nature of self-awareness. And there are a couple of topics I'm not going to touch on, although they're inextricably linked to the concept of sentience, except for briefly. But still in all, I see my down arrow isn't going to work either, so there. Still in all, there's an awful lot involved in the topic of sentience and what it is and how it works that I think is worthy of exploring. And the concept of what it means to be a sentient being is a key fundamental tenet to the practice of the philosophical Tao teachings and to the implementation of those teachings in our own lives. Without this concept, there would be virtually no basis in any kind of reason or philosophy for us to be concerned with the lives of other living things on this planet. So as part of my research, I went out and found several definitions, dictionary type definitions for exactly what qualifies these days as sentience in the minds of the scholarly and the well-educated. And it comes down to a couple of rather pointy but not indiscernible questions. What I've seen amongst the definitions, generally speaking, is that they consider it to be the ability to think or to reason, the ability of a living being of some description to actually have thoughts. They also talk about the ability of the living thing, whatever it may be, to feel various forms of sensations, such as perhaps pleasure or pain, or perhaps somewhat more ethereally the emotional sensations such as joy or fear or happiness or whatever. Key to the definitions is always the ability to suffer, and for some reason we tend to hang this activity on most of the animals and folks that we consider to be sentient, is do they have the ability to suffer. The fourth thing that I saw in the definition struck me as unusual but interesting, so I went ahead and included it. And the thought that was posited was a quantitative measure of the brain and the activity in the brain. That is, the number and mass of the neurons and axons and the activity between the various synapses and the signals of the brain itself. And that particular point actually led into a discussion about the possibility of sentience within artificial intelligence. That is, strong AI is what that's referred to. It's an interesting question, not one that we're going to try to answer right now, but an interesting question, kind of hearkening back to some of the machines in science fiction like the computer HAL from 2001, A Space Odyssey, or much earlier on than that, Colossus in the Forbin Project, which was kind of an interesting movie. So there are a number of things that people have considered as a possible way to determine sentience. And in a lot of cases, those things work. But in some cases, they don't. The basic essential definition for sentience is the awareness or consciousness of one's own presence or existence. Okay? That means for us that sentience includes the senses that we very often take for granted. The things that we don't even think about just because we do them. There are functions of the autonomic nervous system, our sight, our hearing, our sense of touch and taste and smell, and our ability to think and to reason with regard to those senses, right? I like this kind of soup. I don't like this kind of soup. I prefer this over that, whatever that may be. Those sorts of things. It also embodies feelings and emotions and suffering and thought or expression, the things that we do as we go through our daily lives. And perhaps those more than anything, for me personally, are the overwhelming determining factor. And I have a story here in a couple of slides as to why that is. Without even having to think about it, we consider ourselves obviously to be sentient. There's a very large school of thought that says that human beings are the only animal on this planet with the ability to contemplate an existence outside themselves. Maybe that's true, maybe it isn't. I'm not sure we have a definitive way to know whether or not it is. But it definitely puts us in the minds of most scholars and average people at the top of the sentient being food chain, if you will. But below us are any number of living things that also are sentient, and I'll explain why, although we shouldn't take too much explaining. Our family pets, right? Our dogs, our cats, our other domestic animals, many of those animals are without a doubt sentient. And we can argue the point later, although I probably won't debate it. But absolutely they are. Where things start to get a little gray or cloudy is when we think about animals that are feral, wild animals, or animals that we've domesticated to raise for food, animals that we don't encounter in our daily lives, that we don't even think about. It gets even murkier when we think about insects and earthworms and fish and other forms of life that are non-expressive in any way that we can perceive as being expressive. And so when we observe those forms of life, we automatically, for some reason, believe that they are not self-aware. But over the years, I've kind of learned to perhaps challenge that mindset and frame of thinking. And I'll absolutely tell you why. One of the things that we talk about very frequently in these study groups from time to time is the reality of suffering. We talk about it from a variety of religious and philosophical perspectives. We talk about it as it relates to the Tao teachings. We talk about alleviating and relieving suffering. We talk about not inflicting suffering upon ourselves and others. Okay? But it is still a reality of life for all living things that a certain amount of suffering is going to occur in our lives. And so, while we suffer, we also actively seek to alleviate or to mitigate that suffering so that we don't do it so much. And that's a huge focus in very many theological and philosophical traditions. Now, I'm going to tell you here, I have not always been a pet person. When I was younger, I was really allergic to dog dander, cat dander, most anything that had fur on it. And so as a small child, I couldn't be anywhere near them because my face had swelled shut and I really get to looking pretty bad. And as I got older, due to life circumstances and other things, the opportunity just never really raised itself for me to be a pet person with another life that I'd have to take care of in some way. I didn't have the degree of stability required to do that. I did help take care of an awful lot of reptiles from time to time. I still enjoy them, however, my wife doesn't, so you will not ever walk into my house and find a large Burmese python running around here, although I kind of like them. Just isn't going to happen. And I've been around enough of the world to know that there are places on this planet where the dogs and the cats and the animals that we keep for pets are actually part of the menu. Now, to the American way of thinking, to the Western mindset, that's just plain gross. But in very many parts of the world, those animals are what stand between a large number of the population and starvation. Okay? It just is that way. Whether or not it should be that way is a whole nother discussion, but it is. And the question that crosses my mind these days, because of the story I'm about to share to you, is, do other animals, in their own way, attempt to alleviate and mitigate their own suffering just as we do? And that question of late has caused me to lose a little sleep and do a lot of thinking. Not so much recently, but over time, because I've come to a somewhat different understanding about some of these animals than I had before, and the reason is my dog. Our dog Chauncey, I've had ever since we got him, and he is probably the fattest, happiest, laziest hound dog you ever wanted to see. There's nothing remarkable about this dog at all. It's just a mutt. He's a fairly good-sized dog, and for some reason this dog likes me a lot. And interestingly enough, over the years that he's lived with us, I've come to have an awful lot of affection for this critter myself. And I've noticed that no matter what kind of shape I'm in when I encounter my dog, he's always happy to see me. Always. It doesn't make any difference what kind of mood I'm in. It doesn't make any difference whether or not I provide him with his favorite treats. It doesn't make any difference whether or not I pet him or do anything else. He's still always happy to see me. And that never changes. Not ever. Even when he doesn't feel well, which is an interesting kind of a thing all by itself, he's still happy to see me. And yet I know, because I've had him long enough to know that he can be hurt, that he can get sick. I know that he recognizes me, he recognizes my family, he recognizes other people that come to the house from time to time. Okay? He has preferences, just like I do. He has fear, he has anger, just like I do. He has a desire to protect this family that transcends even what I can imagine. It's absolutely unconditional. One of the neat reasons why we have a dog. But in noticing those emotions that come out of this animal towards me, I can't help but believe that my dog is sentient. I think he's not only aware of his own existence, I think he actually has some capacity to think and to reason and to understand certain things. I absolutely know that if every time I came home I hit the dog, it wouldn't take very long before the dog wouldn't have anything to do with me. I don't know how long that would take. I'm certainly not going to experimentally attempt to find out. But I absolutely know that's the truth. I also know that treating the dog with kindness and gentility and compassion makes him come around more frequently, and he's, like I said, always happy to see me. He doesn't always know that I'm going to feed him. He doesn't always know that he's going to get a treat. He doesn't have any idea, I don't think, exactly what the encounter is going to look like. But he always knows I'm going to be nice to him. And he's always happy. But there are some people that he's afraid of. There are some other dogs he's afraid of. There are some other dogs and people that he'd really love to sink his teeth into for some reason or another. I don't know what those reasons are, but I know that it happens. I can see the symptoms in his behavior. And so the fact that I can't unravel the thought processes going on in his mind, for me, don't mean that he isn't self-aware. What it means is that I don't have the capacity to understand how or what he thinks. But these days, I don't need to have that ability. It is sufficient for me to know that every time I walk through the front door of my house, that dog's going to be there to greet me, and he's going to be happy to see me. And this leads to one of the more difficult topics as it relates to sentience. Okay? Observable versus invisible suffering. Or if you prefer, the observable, viewable emotional states and the invisible ones. Within the group of every life form I've ever encountered, all of them, from humans down to the dogs and the cats and most of the mammals that I've ever run into, all have the ability to express some kind of joy and happiness, fear, anger, pain, all of those things. And those things that they can express that we recognize as being an emotional state that we have, we can identify with. We can put a label on that and say, okay, that animal is afraid, or it's hurt, or it's happy, or whatever. But sometimes the way the animal feels, we can neither perceive nor can we interpret. And then those states become invisible. What does my dog feel like when he's at the veterinarian's office and he has to have a little procedure done or something? To be honest, I don't know. Okay? I've not had to have the opportunity to sit with the dog for a day or two at the veterinarian's office because he's had to have something done to him. But I can imagine in my own mind that for him might be somewhat stressful and scary. He'd be out of his familiar environment. He'd be away from the people who love him. We're not talking about one of my kids here. We're talking about the family dog. And the interesting thing is, when it comes to the dog, I'd be just as worried about him as I would be about one of the kids. There's a mutual awareness there that exists, even when I don't know what it is that he's thinking or feeling. The existence of this invisible suffering or invisible expression gets worse when we consider the animals that perhaps we raise for food, the animals that exist in the wild, and the animals around us that we don't even think about. Okay? Because we don't see them, because we don't interact with them. I've never interacted with a herd of cows or pigs or chickens. Okay? So the mere fact that we don't interact with them doesn't mean that there isn't some kind of an awareness, that there's not some kind of an emotive state. But as far as the teachings on sentience goes, that part isn't really relevant as much as it is to err to the side of caution and compassion. And so the teachings say that all life is precious, that all life has worth, that it's worthy of protection and worthy of respect. The teachings say that, of course, some suffering occurs in every life. The suffering we talk about the most is our own human suffering, the various aspects of the human condition that we're in. But the mere fact that it's happening to an animal or to some other, an insect or an earthworm, or pick your favorite creature, doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. And along with the existence of suffering in life, there is the realization that life for us is a temporal thing. In the scope of the universe, in the scope of the Tao of heaven, my 70 or 80-year lifespan isn't even a good blink of an eye. My existence on this planet will amount in the grand scheme of the universe to essentially nothing. Not because I haven't done anything, not because I didn't want to do something. Over the years, I hope from time to time I've actually helped somebody find the same truths I have. But the simple fact of the matter remains that within the scope of eternity, 80 years just isn't significant. Okay? It just isn't. That doesn't stop us from trying. And so the teachings go on to talk about alleviating and mitigating the suffering, not only in other people, but in all life. That all life is sacred enough, worth guarding enough, that it's also worth relieving the suffering of not only ourselves, but the other lives as well. And as with most of the Tao teachings, the nifty side benefit of being aware of these teachings and putting them into practice is that as we eliminate suffering for others, as we seek to be more compassionate people, as we seek to serve others with an intent towards ending suffering, as we do those things, we also alleviate our own suffering. As our life becomes more congruent with the flow of the Tao, we find that our life becomes smoother and easier, less traumatic, and to contain much less suffering. And yet we don't strive with an emotional attachment or with a basket full of ulterior motives and desires. We do what we do out of the natural born virtue of compassion. And so, although it's commonly known that suffering exists everywhere, the wisdom of the teachings is that both suffering and the relief of suffering exists and extends to all living things. It is the yang to the yin and vice versa, the other half of the complementary pair. And that's kind of neat. I don't know about all of you guys. I have a personal preference towards suffering less if I can possibly help it. And heaven knows I've inflicted enough suffering on myself in my own life that any time I can relieve or mitigate that, I'm going to take advantage of that opportunity. So what about killing and dying? Two questions that always come up. Well, everything that's born on this planet, insofar as we know, one day dies in this physical existence. What happens after that, subject to an awful lot of discussion and debate, and you all already know well where I stand personally on that issue. I believe that we are far more than what this earthly body covers. But I can't prove that part. That's only what I believe. And all of you, of course, can feel free to accept or reject anything that I say based on what you believe. However, when it comes to killing, that's a little more personal and a lot closer to home. And there are degrees of that. Every now and again, a mosquito will land on one of us, and without even thinking, we'll turn around and smash that little sucker flat and flip him off our arm. And that happens without so much as a thought. Or we'll take a fly swatter and smash a housefly, throw him in the trash, and that's it. we do not consider insects or arachnids to be sentient, nor to be worthy of our respect and any compassion whatsoever. Now, I'm not going to kid you, I don't enjoy being eaten alive by mosquitoes either. I find that to be just as annoying as it possibly can be. And so I go to fairly great lengths to make sure that my rather large and inviting physiology doesn't wind up being a smorgasbord to a billion mosquitoes. And to this day, if one of them lands on me, I'm probably going to smash him just because I don't want to get bitten. But every now and again, I'll do that, and the question will pop into my mind about what the life of that mosquito was worth. Does it change what I do? Well, so far, not yet. But the question is the beginning of the wisdom. A little farther down the road from that is an infestation of wasps or termites or what have you. And in that particular case, there's something that's invading your home or your place of business or somewhere else where you and they are coexisting. And an infestation of wasps or hornets or some other stinging insects can be dangerous. There are people such as myself who are sensitive to being wasp stings and those sorts of things. And because of that sensitivity, if I get stung, I've got a guaranteed trip to the hospital of my choice before my throat swells shut and I die. In that particular scenario, the wasps and I cannot coexist in the same place. They're not smart enough to realize that I really can't tolerate being stung very well, and it is within their nature to be somewhat aggressive with animals that would impede their ability to survive or carry on their day-to-day existences. Therefore, you got to get rid of them. Okay? Got to do it. Termites eat your house for you. You just can't. You don't spend a couple $300,000 or more on a house and then let a bug eat it out from underneath you. The same thing applies to a gravely ill pet. That is an act of killing that is done out of compassion and mercy. Or hopefully it is. That extends to relatives, friends, parents, children, the people in our lives. Okay? It does not extend to cows, pigs, chickens, sheep, the animals we raise for food for some reason. It just doesn't. And so at opposite ends of the spectrum, there are those animals that we care about and those that we do not care about. Finally, after 60 or 70 or 80 years or so, we face the end of our own lives. And at that point, there isn't a person among us who won't fight with everything that we have for one more breath of life. It is the scariest finality that we know. The thing that we absolutely fear the most, whether we're willing to admit it or not. I say that I don't fear death, and by and large that is the truth. But every now and again I'll think about that, and ice water will run through my veins. And I think that's true as well. So what do the teachings say about all of this? Well, it would seem that on the one hand, we teach that all life is to be respected, protected, and taken care of with a high degree of compassion, tolerance. And then we say, but it's okay to kill something if it's necessary. Is that a paradox? Well, no, not really. The Tao teachings recognize that every now and again a life has to be taken. It's not something that's done lightly. It isn't something to be enjoyed. It's not something to be relished. But when it has to be done, it's done without an emotional attachment. It's done without anger or hatred or fear or rage, and certainly not with a feeling of satisfaction afterwards. Okay? That's removing the infestation of wasps. There's something there that's dangerous, that's potentially life-threatening, that is a situation that has to be remedied, but is remedied without the emotion, without the attachments, without the agendas. Generally speaking, we're taught not to participate in any activity that furthers or promotes causing suffering of any kind. Not to be inflicted on any living thing as much as we're able. Okay? But, saying that, we also have to realize then that all living beings, every living thing on this planet has some form of sentience, some form of self-awareness. Right? You can't get by without that. So, where does that leave us? Well, I tried to sum this up as best I could. I'm not sure I can answer all the questions. I'm not sure I even know what all the right questions are. But we'll give it a shot. I think that we may not always be able to recognize sentience as sentience. I'm pretty sure of that. But I think accepting the fact that all life is worthy of our respect can help us to not be the source of additional suffering and upheaval and strife, either in the lives of the people around us or in the lives of the animals and what have you that we encounter. I also believe that learning to recognize that teaching as true, that all life is significant, is kind of a process of gaining wisdom and understanding that we may not necessarily have because of our upbringing or our geography or some other thing. And I think along with that wisdom and understanding that the Tao teachings lead us to that, and that they guide us in the practices of compassion and kindness that prevent us from doing that. Okay? I also think that respecting life doesn't mean that we have to live with dangerous or unhealthy or violent circumstances. That's not something that we're going to endure. Okay? But in the same breath, respecting all life does mean that when a life has to be taken, it's done appropriately and with the correct mind and heart, so that we don't create an environment of fear and anger or negative karma and emotions. Basically, I think at the end of the day, we're not ever going to go wrong by choosing to view all life as sentient and worthy of our respect and protection. It never hurts us to admit that we don't know what we don't know. And based on what we don't know, perhaps to treat everything that we come across as sentient as we are. So anyway, thanks a whole bunch. As always, I just really enjoy doing this on Sundays. I love this study group and what we get done here. And I hope what I've said is helpful to somebody. So you all have a good day. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架归准是一鞠躬，接班一鞠躬。Okay, everybody, we are done.
Participate in the Tao meeting by joining us online. For information, go to taoism.net/Tao